The Russian parliament just had its most dangerous moment in decades, and the state-controlled media doesn't want you to know it happened. On April 21, 2026, Communist Party leader Gennady Zyuganov walked to the parliamentary rostrum, looked directly into the cameras of the Russian State Duma, and compared Vladimir Putin's Russia to Tsarist Russia, days before the 1917 revolution. Not in a whispered backroom conversation, not in a leaked memo, publicly, out loud, in the heart of Russian power. If you've been following this story, you already know this is no ordinary political spat. But if this is the first you're hearing of it, stay with us, because what happened next changes everything you thought you knew about where this war is actually heading. Drop a comment right now. Do you think Russia is genuinely on the edge of collapse, or is this political theater? We read every single one. The cracks didn't appear overnight. They've been widening for months beneath the polished surface of Russian state television, where carefully edited victory montages play on loop while the actual economic architecture of the country quietly caves in. In the first 2 months of 2026 alone, Russia's economy contracted by 1.8%. The federal budget hemorrhaged a staggering $61 billion deficit in just 3 months, the opening quarter of the year. Oil revenues, the single most critical artery keeping Russia's war machine alive, collapsed by 45% in that same window. And in a moment that would have been unthinkable even 2 years ago, Putin sat in front of his own ministers on camera during a high-level economic meeting on April 15th and openly scolded them. Not privately, not diplomatically, but visibly, furiously in front of rolling cameras. The man who spent 20 years projecting absolute unshakable control has been cornered into performing desperation in public. And every minister in that room now understands something deeply unsettling. Putin's shadow no longer protects them, only fear does. But here is the part of this story that the numbers alone cannot fully explain. And it requires going back exactly 1 century to understand why Zyuganov's words sent a chill through every senior official who heard them. In 1917, Tsarist Russia didn't collapse because it ran out of soldiers. It collapsed because it ran out of belief. The bread riots came first. Then the soldiers at the front stopped following orders. Then the centuries-old Romanov dynasty, which had survived plagues, invasions, and internal rebellions, was gone within months, not years, months. Zyuganov was not reciting history in that parliament chamber. He was issuing a warning, or perhaps a threat. He told the Duma directly, if urgent financial and economic measures are not taken immediately, Russia will face in the fall of 2026 what it faced in the fall of 1917. To say this to Putin's face, inside Putin's fortress, using Putin's greatest historical fear as the weapon, this is not opposition theater. This is a senior figure of the Russian political establishment signaling that the ground beneath the regime is no longer solid. Tell us in the comments, do you think Zyuganov crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed, or is he calculating on something far bigger? Your perspective genuinely matters to this conversation. Now, here is the question nobody in Western media is asking loudly enough. What exactly broke the Russian military machine so completely that even its own parliament started speaking in revolutionary metaphors? The answer is not a secret. It is sitting in plain sight over the skies of eastern Ukraine. Ukraine's drone program, built with limited resources, extraordinary technical intelligence, and ruthless strategic focus, has done something that decades of NATO planning, billions in Western conventional arms, and hundreds of diplomatic summits failed to do. It dismantled the myth of Russian military invincibility from the inside out, using weapons that cost a fraction of what they destroy. Long-range strike drones capable of flying thousands of kilometers began systematically targeting not frontline troops, but Russia's economic infrastructure. The oil refineries, the fuel depots, the energy export terminals that fund every bullet, every missile, and every military salary, keeping the war running. The results were not marginal. They were catastrophic. Between 20 and 40% of Russia's vital oil export capacity was destroyed. Russian refinery processing capacity dropped by 500,000 barrels per day. Russia was forced to completely suspend gasoline exports until July 2026, simply to prevent a domestic fuel crisis. The $13 billion in direct infrastructure damage was staggering enough, but the downstream consequence, A 45% collapse in oil revenues during the first quarter is what transformed an economic problem into an existential one. Russia's Defense Minister Belousov reportedly acknowledged privately to Putin that Ukraine now holds genuine technological superiority in drone warfare. The situation, in his own words, is critical, and the damage is not contained to refineries and pipelines. On the active front lines, the picture is no less devastating. Russia launched its highly publicized spring offensive in early 2026, backed by massive state propaganda, tens of thousands of fresh conscripts, and the full weight of Kremlin messaging that a decisive breakthrough was imminent. It collapsed almost immediately on contact with Ukraine's drone defensive network. In the Sumy and Kostiantynivka directions, advancing Russian mechanized columns were halted, isolated, and destroyed, not by artillery, not by armored counterattacks, but by drone swarms operating at industrial scale. According to Ukrainian Ministry of Defense data from March 2026, 96% of Russia's record 35,000 troop losses in a single month were directly attributable to FPV and close-range drone strikes. Russia is now deploying soldiers on Chinese-made motorcycles and ATVs because its armored vehicle reserves have been so severely depleted by drone attacks that conventional mechanized assault has become tactically impossible in many sectors. These are not the operational realities of an army on the verge of victory. These are the operational realities of an army running out of options and running out of time. The consequences of all this are now landing not in government briefing rooms, but in Russian kitchens, Russian markets, and Russian streets. Real inflation has surpassed 20%, even as state figures attempt to obscure it. Food prices have surged beyond what ordinary families can absorb. Value-added tax was hiked to 22%, squeezing civilian purchasing power precisely when the war economy is demanding the most from ordinary people. The Levada Center, Russia's most credible independent polling organization, published data in March 2026 showing that 67% of Russians now want the war to end immediately and unconditionally. The hardcore nationalist faction that demands full military victory and total occupation of Ukraine has fallen to just 24%, its lowest level since the invasion began. Putin's personal approval rating, once his most jealously guarded political asset, is in measurable freefall. When a popular Russian blogger named Victoria Bona published a video openly denouncing the war, it accumulated 30.8 million views within days. In Russia, under active censorship, that number is not just a statistic, it is a seismic reading. The Kremlin responded to this growing public pressure the way frightened authoritarian systems always respond, with more pressure. A digital blackout was imposed across a massive section of central Moscow in March 2026, cutting mobile internet and telegram access. Corruption purge arrests began targeting figures connected to former Defense Minister Shoigu. The FSB Academy was renamed after Felix Dzerzhinsky, the founder of the Soviet secret police and architect of the Red Terror, in what reads less like an institutional tribute and more like a deliberate psychological signal to a restless population. History does not repeat itself exactly, but it rhymes with terrifying precision when the conditions are similar enough. A government at war with a neighboring nation, an economy destroyed by the cost of that war, a military losing the confidence of the people it is supposed to protect. A ruling class beginning to calculate whether loyalty to the leader is more dangerous than replacing him. These were the conditions in Russia in 1916. Zyuganov stood in the Duma and said plainly that they are the conditions in Russia in 2026. The oligarchs who built their fortunes inside Putin's system are watching their assets freeze, their access to global markets disappear, and their personal security narrow with every passing month. The generals who once competed for Putin's favor are watching their reputations destroyed in a war that is consuming soldiers faster than they can be trained and equipment faster than it can be replaced. And the Russian public, which endured years of propaganda, fear, and carefully managed information, is now living with 20% inflation, dead children, and internet blackouts, and starting cautiously, dangerously, to talk about it. The hourglass is not a metaphor anymore, it is a measurement. Russia's foreign reserves are depleting. Its drone defense networks have been exposed as penetrable. Its most credentialed political figures are now invoking revolution inside the parliament, and the single variable that could accelerate all of it, a coup, a military mutiny, a regional collapse, or simply a public that finally stops being afraid, is no longer a question of possibility. It is a question of timing. The one question that no analyst, no intelligence agency, and no government has been able to answer with confidence is this: when the moment of decision comes for Russia's elites, will they move against Putin to save themselves, or will they wait one moment too long, exactly as the Romanov loyalists did a century ago? Leave your answer in the comments. We track the pulse of this story daily, and we will be back with the next development the moment it breaks. If this kind of analysis is what you've been looking for, real, deep, and updated daily, then subscribing takes 1 second, and it means you never miss the moment when history actually moves.